It was the year 2847 and the world was coming to an end. Not in the way that old movies said it would happen, with explosions and aliens coming to Earth. No, Earth was slowly and quietly dying under the weight of 12 billion people and mistakes that could never be fixed. The oceans were like acidic soup, the air tasted like metal, and every government on Earth had the same urgent task: find us a new home before it's too late. Commander Sarah Mitchell stood on the ESS Horizon's observation deck, looking down at the planet below through thick glass. Like a bruised peach, Kepler 186f hung in space, all purples and deep blues, wrapped in clouds that never seemed to clear. It wasn't really pretty, but it was a sign of hope. Dr. James Chin yelled from his station, "Commander, the geoscan results are coming in." His voice had that sharpness that meant something strange had shown up on his screens. Sarah walked across the deck, her boots sticking to the floor and keeping her grounded in the ship's fake gravity. The 35 crew members around her were all specialists chosen for this mission and were working at their stations. They had been in space for 4 years, following astronomical data that said Kepler 186f might be able to support human life. This was their 5th survey of the planet below in 3 years. The first 4 were terrible. 1 was too cold, 1 had air that would burn your lungs, and 2 were just rocks with pretty colors that were dead. It had to be different this time. Sarah leaned over James's shoulder and asked, "What am I looking at?" There was a 3-dimensional map of the planet's crust on the doctor's screen. It showed layers of rock and mineral deposits in different colors. But down there, about 3 kilometers below the surface in the southern hemisphere, there were patterns that didn't make any sense. James tapped the screen with his stylus and said, "These energy signatures. Commander, they're huge. I have never seen anything like this before. I thought they were thermal vents or something like that at first, but look at the patterns." Sarah looked. The sources of energy weren't random. They made shapes that were geometric and exact, and they stretched for kilometers in neat groups. Things that happen in nature didn't do that. "How stable are they?" she asked. "That's the strange part. They are completely stable. No change, no decay. Whatever is making this energy has been doing it for a very, very long time." James opened another screen. "The temperatures I'm reading should melt rock, but the geology around it is still in good shape. It seems like the energy is somehow trapped." Dr. Lisa Park, the team's xenobiologist, had stopped working to listen to them. "Are you saying that something fake is down there?" James said, "I'm saying there's something down there that can't be explained. We have to send a probe." Sarah stood up straight, her mind already going through rules and options. They had been to space for 4 years and looked at planets for 3 years, but they had found no proof of intelligent alien life. Yes, bacteria. Yes, complex organic molecules. But there was nothing that built things or left signs of civilization. Until now, maybe. "Get a drilling probe ready," Sarah said. "I want that thing in the ground in 6 hours. Full set of sensors and the ability to go to the deepest level." The crew acted quickly and efficiently as they had been trained to do. Sarah went back to the observation deck and looked down at Kepler 186f with fresh eyes. The planet's constant twilight, which was caused by its dim red dwarf star, had seemed sad before. It felt mysterious now, as if it were hiding secrets in the shadows. The probe broke through 8 hours later. Sarah stood in the command center with her senior staff around her as the first pictures came in. The probe sensors were on the whole way down, and it drilled through 3 kilometers of rock and sediment. Now it had broken into a huge hole in the ground, and what its camera showed made everyone in the room stop talking. The room was huge, at least the size of a football stadium, and the walls were smooth as if they had been carved with precise tools. But it wasn't the room itself that took their breath away. What was inside was what mattered. There was a structure rising from the floor of the chamber that no one had ever seen before. It was huge, at least 30 meters long, and even though it was so big, it was still curved and beautiful. At first, Sarah's mind tried to make sense of it by comparing it to things she knew, like a building's foundation or some kind of industrial tool. But then the probe's lights hit it from a different angle, and it was clear that the truth was out there. It was a claw. Not in a figurative sense and not like a claw. It was a real huge claw that had been perfectly preserved. Each of its 4 talons was as thick as a person. The stuff was unlike anything they had in their databases. It was dark like obsidian but had veins of gold running through it. When the probe sensors focused on it, the energy readings shot up so high that they had to recalibrate the equipment. "God," Dr. Emily Roberts, the team's archaeologist, said in a low voice. She looked pale. "That's natural. At least it used to be. The molecular structure is like keratin, which is what nails and horns are made of, but it is so dense that it can't be broken down." "Organic?" Lisa Park got closer to the screens. You're saying that something biological grew claws that were as big as buildings? The energy readings are through the roof, James said, typing quickly on his keyboard. That thing is giving off energy like a small star, but it's contained. No matter what it's made of, it's working as both a generator and a battery at the same time. Sarah's heart was racing. She had practiced first contact situations and learned all the rules and procedures. But they all thought they would find something strange, something that humans can't understand. This wasn't strange. It was impossible, like something out of a story, but it was also familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. Commander, Emily said softly, I know how this sounds, but that energy signature, the way it is made up of living things and the size of it. She stopped for a moment as if she were gathering her strength. There are stories of huge reptilian creatures in the myths of many cultures on Earth, even though they are thousands of miles and years apart. Animals that could fly, breathe fire, and were said to be very powerful. James said, Don't say it. Dragons? Emily said at the end. I think we just found proof that dragons exist. People in the room started arguing and not believing what they heard. Sarah raised her hand to get everyone to be quiet. Her commander's authority cut through the noise. She said firmly, Evidence doesn't care what we think. What matters is what we can show. That building down there is real. Those readings of energy are real. Whatever made this technology or grew this biology was here millions of years before we came. She looked at her team. We're going down there. I want a full team of explorers ready to go in 12 hours. You three, Emily, James, and Lisa, are with me. We're going to find out what else is hidden on this planet. As the crew split up to get ready, Sarah stayed at the screen and stared at the huge claw. The probe's lights made the golden veins look like they were pulsing with a rhythm that was almost like breathing. She couldn't shake the small voice in the back of her mind that asked, if these beings were so powerful and advanced that their remains still made impossible energy millions of years later, then what could have made them disappear? Sarah thought that the answer to that question would change everything people thought they knew about their place in the universe. It took 6 hours for the landing craft to reach the surface of Kepler 186f. The ride was bumpy because of the turbulence in the atmosphere. Through the viewport, Sarah saw them drop through layers of purple clouds until they finally broke into the dim twilight that passed for daylight on this world. The landscape below was strange but hauntingly beautiful. There were rolling plains of dark plants that soaked up the red dwarf's weak light, mountains that rose like jagged teeth against the horizon, and huge areas of crystal formations that caught and reflected the little light that was there. Everything was colored in shades of red and black. They landed 2 kilometers from the excavation site, where automated mining drones had been working non-stop for 3 days. By the time Sarah and her team got there in the all-terrain vehicles, the drones had found something that made the first claw discovery look like a preview of the main event. Commander, you need to see this. Dr. Marcus Webb's voice crackled over the radio. He had been in charge of the excavation from a temporary command post. We've hit something big. Very big. The excavation site looked like a huge archaeological dig on Earth. Huge floodlights lit up a crater that was at least 200 meters wide and 50 meters deep. Mining drones crawled along the walls like mechanical bugs, carefully taking off layers of rock and sediment under Marcus's watchful eye. But what was at the bottom made Sarah's heart stop. A structure so big and complicated rose from the dug-up pit that her brain had a hard time understanding how big it was. It looked like a huge wing or sail made of plates that looked like scales and were layered on top of each other. Each scale was the size of a car and was arranged in perfect geometric patterns that made the surface both flexible and strong. The whole thing was at least 80 meters long, and it might have been longer because some parts were still buried. The material was like the claw. It was the same dark substance with golden veins, but here the gold made patterns that were clearly planned, almost like circuit boards embedded in living tissue. Is that what I think it is? Lisa Park asked Sarah, who was standing next to her at the edge of the crater. Yes, if you think it's a wing, Emily Roberts said, her voice full of awe. Look at how it's built. Those aren't just scales, they move. Do you see how they overlap? That would let you move around more easily while still being safe. Those ridges on the edges are aerodynamic features, by the way. James Chin was already putting sensors in place, even though he usually is very careful as a scientist. The energy output is amazing. It looks like each scale makes its own field, and when you put them all together, they make a network that makes the total power grow by a lot. Each piece is like a cell in a huge battery. The excavation grew quickly over the next 3 days. They found more sediment with each meter they took away. 2 wings, not just 1. It wasn't just wings. There were also what looked like pieces of armored plating, ribcage-like structures made of the same material that was impossible to break, and conduits that looked like both biological organs and technological equipment. By the end of the first week, there was no denying the truth. They had found the remains of a huge creature at least 150 meters long from head to tail, preserved in a way that made no sense. But calling it remains didn't seem right. Even though they had been buried for more than 3 million years as geological dating suggested, the structures weren't falling apart. They were still working, still making power, and still doing what they were supposed to do on some level. James said during one of their nightly briefings in the command post, "This shouldn't be possible." The team was tired but too excited to sleep as they sat around a table full of data tablets and holographic projections. Biological tissue breaks down. Organic matter breaks down. Even fossils are just minerals that have replaced the original structure. But this, he pointed to the screens that showed the digging. This is kept as if it died yesterday, but it's been here for millions of years. Maybe that's the answer, Emily said. Maybe it's not just biology. Check out these buildings. She pulled up a picture of one of the scales. The molecular structure is not like anything else we have in our databases. Yes, it comes from living things, but it has been changed at the atomic level. These veins of gold? They aren't just for looks. They're moving energy around, storing it, and spreading it throughout the whole structure. Biotechnology, Marcus said. They combined biology and technology so completely that the line between them became meaningless. Sarah had been quiet as she studied the data and realized more and more what it meant. We need to look at this differently if this is technology and this whole thing is basically a biological machine. We aren't archaeologists digging up fossils. Engineers are trying to figure out a device that is more advanced than anything humans have ever made. James said, the energy problem alone, as he pulled up power readings. If we could figure out how these scales make and store energy without any visible fuel source, we could solve Earth's energy crisis right away. One scale, just one, makes power that is more stable than the best fusion reactors. And there are thousands of them. But that's just the surface level, Lisa said. She had been looking at the biological parts. I found structures in the brain or something like them. Pathways that moved information around the body at speeds that would make our quantum computers look slow. And get this, the brain, or what we think is the brain, is more than just tissue that helps us think. It's crystallized thought that has somehow been kept. I don't even know how to explain it right. Emily got up and walked to the biggest holographic display. It showed a reconstruction of the whole creature based on what they had found so far. Everyone stopped talking when she slowly turned it was a dragon. There was no other way to say it. The long, snake-like body, the huge wings, the strong legs that end in huge claws, and the head with its graceful horns and face shape that is good for both intelligence and hunting. There were stories about these kinds of creatures in every culture on Earth. Here was one real and impossible. How? Marcus asked what everyone else was thinking. How did every culture on Earth come up with stories about dragons when dragons lived millions of years before humans did, on a planet that is 4 years' travel from our solar system? Maybe, Emily said slowly, the question isn't how people knew about dragons. Perhaps the question is, how did dragons find out about people? It was clear that the effects of that were going to be bad. In the weeks that followed, the digging uncovered more buildings. They came across what looked like a settlement or maybe even a lab. Buildings that blended in perfectly with the landscape and were made from the same biotech materials. The team found things inside these buildings that made no sense to them. There were devices that showed holographic interfaces with symbols in a language they didn't know when you touched them, containers that kept perfect vacuum seals for millions of years, and what looked like engines. The engines were both beautiful and scary. They were all about the same size as shipping containers and looked like crystalline hearts with golden veins running through them. When James carefully turned one on with a low-power probe, it started to hum right away and made things nearby float. Anti-gravity, he said in a low voice. Controlled, stable anti-gravity with no warm-up time, no fuel use that we can see, and the field strength can be changed based on. He stopped and frowned. Based on what? I can't see any controls or an interface. Emily carefully walked up to the engine and reached out with one hand. As soon as her fingers got close to the surface, symbols appeared in the air around it and slowly turned. They were beautiful, flowing letters that looked like they were both written language and math equations at the same time. Lisa realized, it's reacting to bioelectrical fields. It looks at the user's brain waves. The whole point of this technology is to connect directly to the brain. Sarah made the choice that would change everything. We need to move some of these artifacts to the horizon. Let's start with the smallest energy cells and move up from there. I want our top engineers to look into these systems. We can help Earth if we can understand even a little bit of this technology. We can help people. The first energy cell they brought on board the Horizon was about the size of a basketball. It kept the ship's life support, communications, navigation, propulsion, and all other systems running for 6 months without showing any signs of running out. The effects were huge. "Commander," James said one night, 3 months into their reverse engineering work, "we're making progress, but it's slow. The people who made this technology understand it, but we don't. It's like trying to learn to read by looking at a book in a language you don't know. We can see that it's language and patterns, but do we really understand? That's a whole different story." "Then we change," Sarah said firmly. "People have always been good at one thing, making things work for us. We didn't come up with fire, wheels, electricity, or nuclear power. We found them and learned how to use them. This is just the next step." But late at night, when Sarah was alone on the observation deck looking down at the excavation sites on Kepler 186f's surface, she thought about the beings who had made all of this. Where were they? Why did they leave behind such amazing technology that was perfectly preserved, as if it were waiting for someone to find it? And the question that kept her up at night the most was whether they were waiting for humans in particular, or if any intelligent species that came to this world would have found this dragon tech and felt the same urge to use power they didn't fully understand. Sarah was afraid that the answer might decide whether the future of humanity would be great or terrible. 2 years went by on Kepler 186f, and people started to change. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a young engineer who was part of the second wave of people sent from Earth, was the one who made the breakthrough. Senior scientists had been trying to figure out how the dragon technology worked using standard methods, but Yuki had a different idea. "Stop thinking like people," she said to the team during one of her talks. "People who can use tools didn't make this technology. The tools were the ones who built it. Every interface and control system is made to connect directly to the brain. We have been trying to control something that is supposed to respond to thoughts with keyboards." She showed us one of the smaller Dragon Tech devices, which was a scale-like part that was about the size of a dinner plate. Yuki had made a neural interface headset that worked, but it wasn't as sleek as the Dragon Tech. She put it on and concentrated on the scale. The device responded right away, with its golden veins glowing brighter as it created a stable energy field that lifted a table off the ground. Yuki took off the headset and said, "It reads intention. Not just brain waves or electrical signals, but also the meaning behind what we think. The technology is semi-sentient, which means it can respond to sentience. That's why it has lived for millions of years. It has been waiting." That news opened the floodgates. Earth sent 20 more ships to Kepler 186f in 6 months. The planet, which had once been a possible colony site, had become something much more valuable, a treasure trove of technology that could change the course of human history. The ESS Horizon was now the flagship of a growing fleet, and the number of excavation sites had grown from 1 to 15, spread out over the whole planet. The first real-world use was in propulsion. Once neural interfaces made it possible to understand the Dragon engines, they did more than just make anti-gravity fields. They changed space itself, making bubbles of warped spacetime that let ships move without breaking the lightspeed barrier. The ESS Pathfinder, the first ship to use Dragon technology, made the trip from Kepler 186f to Earth in 3 weeks. A trip that normal ships took 4 years to make. Admiral Chin Wei said during a broadcast to both planets, "We're calling it Drake Drive." He was Sarah's boss and is now permanently stationed in the Kepler system. Named after the dragons that made it. With this technology, people will be able to get to any star system in the galaxy in months instead of decades or even centuries. The Drake Drive was only the start though. Dr. James Chin and a group of climatologists and terraforming experts had changed the Dragon technology so that it could work in the atmosphere. The same energy systems that powered the huge dragons could be made bigger to work on a planetary scale. When a group of Dragon Tech processors were sent to Venus, they started changing the hellish atmosphere into something that could be breathed. Models said this would only take 50 years instead of the 1,000 that had been thought. "We're playing God," Marcus Webb said one night as he and Sarah stood at the edge of the biggest excavation site. Teams worked around the clock below them to find and organize Dragon artifacts. "Do you ever think about that?" Sarah saw the lights of people moving around on the alien world. "Every day. I also think about the 12 billion people who live in crowded cities on Earth, breathe filtered air, and wait for their chance at a better life. Marcus, this technology isn't just about power or exploration. It's about staying alive." "Is it?" Marcus looked at her. "Or is it about growth? How long until we use Drake drives not to find new homes but to build an empire? How long will it be before the terraforming tech that is supposed to make gardens is used to destroy enemy worlds?" Sarah didn't know what to say because she had been thinking the same thing. There were big arguments about ethics on both planets. Religious leaders said it was blasphemy and that people were ruining themselves with evil technology. Scientists argued about how dangerous it was to use systems they didn't fully understand. Politicians saw a chance to gain power and control over dragon tech, so they started making deals and forming groups. The digging went on in the middle of everything. They had now found 7 complete dragon remains, each one a little bit different from the others. Some were made to be fast, while others were made to be strong. One specimen, which the excavation team called Thunderhead, clearly had armor plating that was stronger and weapons systems that looked like they were biological built into its structure. They were warriors, Emily Roberts said as she looked at the remains of Thunderhead. Not just builders or explorers. These creatures fought wars. The discovery of dragon weapons technology was bound to happen, but it still shocked both the scientific community and the military. The bioenergy weapons were beautiful and scary. They could turn the same energy fields that powered ships into beams of concentrated force. When tested on asteroids, one dragon weapon had turned a rock the size of a mountain into gas. Admiral Chen Wei set strict rules for weapon research, but Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before someone broke them. This kind of power, with the ability to destroy more than anything else in history, was too tempting. But the biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected find in the northern hemisphere of the planet. A survey team had discovered a structure that was not the dragon remains. It was a building built into the side of a mountain, and Emily was finally able to partially translate the carved symbols that marked its entrance. Forge, she read slowly, tracing the letters with her fingers. Or maybe a factory. Workshop. The words are hard to understand, but this is where they made things. They found the tools and equipment that the dragons used to make their technology inside the building, which was preserved in the same impossible way as everything else. More importantly, they found documents, crystallized data storage that held instructions, blueprints, and rules for how to use the equipment. It was like finding the Library of Alexandria, but for a civilization that had learned how to combine biology and technology millions of years before humans learned how to make fire. Yuki Tanaka was in charge of the team that figured out what the data meant. It took 8 months of work to make more advanced neural interfaces and learn how to think in the strange mix of language, math, and something like music that dragons used to talk to each other. When she finally shared her results, the conference room on the horizon was full of all the senior scientists and officers in the system. They didn't just make technology, Yuki said as she showed holographic pictures of dragon society that had been pulled from the data. They made themselves. These huge biomechanical creatures that we think of as dragons were made on purpose. Over thousands of generations, the original species changed themselves so that they could survive in harsh environments, travel between stars, and thrive in conditions that would kill most living things. The pictures showed how the smaller creatures, which were probably no bigger than elephants on Earth, changed over time through bioengineering into the titans whose remains they had been digging up. James said, they turned themselves into living spaceships. Admiral Chen Wei said softly, and now we're on the same path. Using their technology to change who we are and go beyond what we thought we could do. Over the next year, the change in human civilization sped up. Mars, which had been a small colony barely surviving in underground domes for a long time, became a place to test dragon tech terraforming. The first settlements on the surface were breathing processed Martian air without suits within a year and a half. The ice on Europa melted, turning it into a water world that was perfect for aquatic biodomes. The methane in Titan's atmosphere was slowly changing. Every planet in the solar system could be a place for people to live. And the colony ships with Drake drives started to reach nearby star systems beyond Sol. People found new Earths, settled on them, and connected them through a growing network of human worlds. But Sarah saw something wrong in the reports that were coming back from Earth. People weren't just using dragon technology to explore and terraform. Weapons research had become a military issue. Countries that used to work together in space were now fighting over dragon artifacts. There were fights over who had the right to new dragon sites and border disputes on newly settled worlds. We're making the same mistakes that people have always made, she told Emily one night. Just with better tools. Emily was looking at a very beautiful object that looked like a dragon's eye. It was crystallized but still seemed to be alive, still seeing even though its owner had been dead for a long time. Maybe that's what they figured out. That's probably why they went away. What do you mean? There are holes in the data that Yuki decrypted. There were planned gaps, like whole sections were taken out before they left. But there are pieces, warnings, and hints that their technology came at a cost. Emily slowly turned the crystal eye, watching the light bend as it moved through its depths. They did everything we're doing now. The ability to change the world, unlimited power, and living forever through bioengineering. But something went wrong. They either killed themselves or ran away because of something they did or became. I think they left all of this here to teach us something. Sarah said, "We're not learning a lesson." "Yes," Emily said. "We're too dazzled by the power to see the warning signs." Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She stood on the observation deck and watched Kepler 186f slowly spin below. There were now excavation sites all over the planet, with lights shining on its surface as people dug deeper and deeper in search of more dragon tech, more power and more answers. Without the dragon technology, it would have taken hundreds of years for people to do what they did in 2 years. They had fixed the energy crisis, started terraforming several worlds, figured out how to travel faster than light, and were close to using bioengineering based on dragon examples to make people live forever. They were getting stronger and stronger. The question was whether they would get smart enough to handle that power or if they would have to go through the same disaster that the dragons did. Sarah knew that the answer was probably already written in the stars. They just hadn't found it yet. A team led by Dr. Robert Hayes, a linguist who had been cataloging dragon text samples, sent the message from a routine excavation in the southern continent. "Commander Mitchell, we have found something else. Not technology, not remains. A library." Sarah took a shuttle down right away and she brought Emily, James and Yuki with her. The site was deep in a mountain range, where erosion had revealed an entrance that had been sealed off on purpose millions of years ago. The library was huge, like a cathedral carved out of living rock. The walls were covered in flowing dragon script from floor to ceiling. But it wasn't cut. Emily was more and more amazed as she realized that it had grown. The walls were made of crystallized information, which is a way to store three-dimensional data that goes down meter after meter into the rock face. Robert's voice echoed in the huge room as he said, "It's all here. Their whole history, philosophy, science, and warnings. All of the things they wanted to keep." The library was where the team set up base camp, and Yuki started the long process of making interfaces to read the walls. It took them 3 months to get the information reliably, and then it took Emily and Robert another 2 months to translate it correctly. What they learned made everything different. Of course, the dragons didn't call themselves dragons. Their name for themselves meant something like the shaped ones, or maybe the self-made. They had changed from smaller creatures, but millions of years of careful bioengineering had turned them into beings with amazing strength and long lives. At their peak, the shaped ones ruled over more than 1,000 star systems, changed the surface of hundreds of worlds, and lived in a society that combined personal freedom with group consciousness through neural networks that connected solar systems. Emily said during a briefing, they were utopian, at least according to them. There would be no poverty or disease, unlimited energy, and art and science would thrive throughout the galaxy. They lived in what they called the Golden Peace for almost 50,000 years. What happened? Admiral Chenwei asked. He had come from the orbital stations just for this briefing because he knew how important it was. Emily and Robert looked at each other before she went on. They made one big mistake. They thought that having power and technology would make them smart. But it turns out that wisdom doesn't come from what you know or what you can do. It comes from what you decide not to do. She showed pictures from the library walls of dragons arguing, then fighting, and then arguing again. The shaped ones started to break apart in their ideas. Some thought they should help and protect less advanced species they met. Some people thought they shouldn't get involved. The third group, the most extreme, thought they should actively change the galaxy and get rid of any possible competition before it could challenge them. James said quietly, "They fought each other." Robert agreed, saying, "It was called the Sundering." It went on for 3,000 years. Whole star systems were wiped out. Planets became unlivable. And the technology they had made to build and terraform was turned into weapons that could destroy things in ways that were beyond imagination. The walls showed battles that were bigger than anything that had ever happened in human history. There were fleets of biomechanical dragons fighting in the void, planets breaking apart because of weaponized terraforming, and even stars being used as weapons. Emily went on, the war did not end in victory but in exhaustion. The surviving shaped ones, maybe only a few 100,000 from a population of billions, met at what they called the Council of Last Dawn. They made a choice that would change their lives. The pictures showed the gathering, dragons of all shapes and sizes filling a huge space structure. Their neural networks were linked in the largest group mind they had ever tried. Robert said, they made the choice to leave. All of them. To leave the galaxy they had ruled for so long and look for a new place, a new start where they could learn to be better than they had been. Before they left though, Emily said, pulling up new pictures, they did something amazing. They kept their technology, knowledge, and history alive in places like these that are spread out over hundreds of worlds. Not obvious but not hidden either. Put them in a place where any species that learned how to travel between stars would eventually find them. Admiral Chenwei leaned in. Why? Because, Emily said softly, they wanted to give other species a choice they never gave themselves. The choice to learn from someone else's mistakes before making their own. Everyone in the room stopped talking. Robert pointed to the walls around them and said, "This library and others like it hold their entire history. The good and the bad. They wrote down everything. How they got their technology and how they used it wrong. How they built their society and how they brought it down. They left it all behind as a warning." Yuki, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "There's more. There are parts of the library that haven't been translated yet, but I've seen enough of the math formulas to know what they mean. The shaped ones made technology that could change not only matter and energy, but also time and consciousness. They got what we might call godlike powers. And it wasn't enough," Sarah said, her understanding growing. "Even with all that power, they couldn't figure out the most important problem in life. How to get along with others and make decisions based on wisdom instead of fear or the desire to control." "Exactly," Emily said. "The last entries in the library are notes from different shaped ones to whoever might find them in the future. Would you like to hear one?" Admiral Chenwei nodded. When Emily touched a part of the wall, the crystallized data storage made a sound that was both strange and painfully familiar. The translation software turned it into English, but it still had some of the original emotion. "I am called Stormwing and I was there at the end at the beginning of our exodus. I helped make the first engines that let us change the shape of worlds. I taught kids how to connect their minds across the stars. I thought we were making heaven. I was wrong. Not the technology which worked just as it should have. I was wrong about us. We believed that gaining power would bring us peace, that getting everything we wanted would make us happy, and that living for thousands of years would make us wise. But being immortal without growing is just being stuck forever. When power has no purpose, it becomes oppression. Knowledge without humility turns into arrogance. We fought ourselves because we had gotten rid of all the outside problems and hadn't gotten ready for the only real problem. The one inside each of us, the choice between what we can do and what we should do. We left you everything we learned, so if you find this message, please read it. You can use it or not. But know this, the technology will give you more power than you can imagine. The real question is if you will know how to use that power wisely. We didn't. Maybe you'll do better than we did. We hope that. We left these gifts behind for that reason. Not to save you but to let you save yourselves." There was only silence after the recording ended. The first person to speak was Admiral Chenwei. "We need to call an emergency meeting of the Earth Council. All of this information needs to be sent to every person, institution, and government that works with dragon technology." Marcus Webb said, "Some people will ignore the warning. They'll only see the chance, not the risk." "Yes, probably," Sarah said. "But at least they can't say they weren't told. The dragons gave us their story so we wouldn't tell it again." The library's translation went on for the next few months. With each new piece of information, the shaped ones became clearer. Their successes and failures, their amazing accomplishments, and their horrible mistakes. They found out that the dragons had met 7 other intelligent species during their 50,000-year rule. 4 of them they had raised and led to the stars. 2 of them they killed when those species turned out to be hostile. 1 they had unintentionally driven to extinction by interfering in a way that was well-meaning but harmful to their culture. They found out that dragon society had the same problems as humans. Inequality, even though they had all the resources they needed because some dragons were just better at designing themselves than others. Disputes over resources that weren't hard to find but were still wanted because of tradition or status. Wars fought over ideas that seemed important at the time but seem silly now. James realized, they were like us. Even with all that power and technology, they were still basically like us. Not perfect, having trouble and trying to get better but often failing. Emily said, "That's the point. That's what they wanted us to know. You are still the same person with technology. It just makes it louder. Technology makes you better at helping other people if you're smart and kind. If you're scared and angry, technology makes it easier for you to destroy things. The tools don't decide what happens. People who use them do." But even as the academic world learned these lessons, the militarization of dragon technology kept going. The biggest countries on Earth were making fleets of warships with Drake drives, and each one was stronger than anything anyone had ever thought of before. Some of the colony worlds were setting up their own governments, and not all of them thought of Earth as an authority to follow. Ironically, the first war fought with dragon technology happened on a colony world called New Hope. 2 groups of settlers got into a fight over terraforming rights, which turned violent. One side had weapons made from dragons. The fight lasted 4 minutes. There were 2,000 deaths. The land was burned for hundreds of square kilometers. Sarah felt sick to her stomach as she watched the news. It's happening. What the dragons told us would happen. Maybe not, Yuki said, but she didn't sound sure. We know about the risks now. We can learn from their past. That has to mean something. Does it? Sarah asked. Or are we just like them, doomed to make the same mistakes even though we know how to avoid them? 3 weeks later, the library on Kepler 186f gave the answer. Robert had been translating the most important parts, the last words of the shaped ones before they left. Commander, you need to hear this. Robert's voice shook over the radio. The last message, the last thing they wrote down. It is meant for all people. James said, that's not possible. They left 3 million years ago. People weren't even around yet. I know, Robert said. But listen. He played the recording, and once again that strange but familiar voice filled the air. To those who will call themselves human, if our calculations are correct and you are the species that evolves on the third world of Sol, we leave this final message. We have seen your world from a distance, using technology that you can't even begin to imagine. We have seen the potential in the little monkeys that live in the forests on your planet. We have figured out how likely it is that you will become sentient, develop technology, and eventually reach the stars. That we could have stayed, shown you the way, and kept you from making the same mistakes we did. But that would take away your choice, which is the most important thing. We don't own the wisdom we give you. You don't learn if we stop you from making mistakes. If we make your society for you, it is not yours. It is ours. That we leave you our story and our technology, but we don't stay to see how you use them. You have to make your own decisions. You have to be in charge of your own fate. We can only tell you this. The universe is big, old, and mostly empty. Life is not common. Intelligence is less common. Of all the things, wisdom is the rarest. We got smart, but we never really got wise. Maybe you will do better. We left you this legacy because we had hope, even if it was foolish. Good luck, little people. May you be smarter than we were. The recording was over. For a long time the room was quiet. Admiral Chen Wei finally spoke. They knew. They must have known that we would find this millions of years ago. They left it just for us. And they didn't want to get involved, Emily said. Even though they knew we might make the same mistakes they did and ruin ourselves with their technology, they chose to let us choose our own fate. Sarah looked at her team of scientists, engineers, and warriors. They were all smart, flawed, and very, very human. They had been given the best gift and the worst burden possible. The knowledge and tools to become something more than they were, along with the full awareness of how badly that transformation could go wrong. So what do we do now? She asked. Nobody knew the answer. Sarah thought that the question itself might be the most important thing. There was still hope as long as people kept asking that question, wondering what the right choices were, and struggling with the morality of power and wisdom. The dragons had failed, but they still cared about what would happen because of what they did. They had failed, but they still hoped for better. If people could keep that hope, that care, and that willingness to question their own choices even as they became godlike, then maybe, just maybe, they could do what the dragons couldn't. Or maybe the real lesson was that success doesn't mean never making mistakes. It was about learning from them, changing, and never giving up the fight to be better than you were. The dragons had taught people everything they knew. It was now up to people to choose what to do with it. 5 years after the discovery of Kepler 186f, people were very different. There were now 42 habitable worlds in the solar system, and dragon technology had turned each one from a hostile place into a home for millions. Mars had an artificial atmosphere that smelled like spring rain. The clouds on Venus had cleared, revealing a tropical paradise. Even Mercury, which is closest to the Sun, had underground cities that stayed cool thanks to dragon tech temperature control systems. This made the planet's closeness to Sol a good thing instead of a bad thing. Beyond Sol, people had set up colonies in 17 different star systems. It used to take years to travel between stars, but now it only takes weeks. Communication used to be limited to the speed of light, but now it can happen in real time across hundreds of light years thanks to quantum-entangled dragon tech networks. The energy crisis was over. They were working to get rid of poverty in a planned way. Disease was going away before medical technology was reverse-engineered from dragon biosystems. The maximum lifespan of a human being used to be about 100 years, but now it could be as long as 200 years with good health and energy. By all objective standards, humanity had reached utopia. And Sarah Mitchell was scared. She was in the newly built Hall of Remembrance on Kepler 186f, a huge building built around the excavation site where they first found dragon bones. The hall was a museum, a research center, and a memorial all in one. It was meant to keep the lessons of the dragons in people's minds. Anyone could read the full translated history of the shaped ones on the walls, which showed their rise and fall. Behind energy fields were artifacts like dragon scales that still glowed with power, weapons that could break worlds, and tools that could change matter with a thought. But the central chamber was the main reason most people came. It was there that the most complete dragon skeleton ever found had been put back together. It was 30 meters tall, with wings that were almost twice as wide. It was a monument to biological engineering at its best. At the bottom of the skeleton was the inscription they had found with it. It was the dragon's name and a description of itself, Skyfire the Peacemaker, who tried to stop the sundering and failed, leaving this last testimony to the cost of good intentions without wisdom. Sarah came here to think about why she had fought so hard for a careful, measured adoption of dragon technology instead of the gold rush that had really happened. Commander Mitchell? A voice broke into her thoughts. She turned to see a young woman, maybe 25, in the uniform of the Exploration Corps. It said Lieutenant Maria Santos on her name tag. "Only Sarah now," she said softly. "I retired 2 years ago. What can I do for you, Lieutenant?" Maria said, "I'm leaving tomorrow. My grandmother told me to talk to you first. She said you were there at the beginning and that you knew more about what we found here than almost anyone else." Sarah said, "Your grandmother is nice. What did you want to say?" Maria looked up at the huge skeleton that was above them. "I was born on Mars, in the first city on the surface. From the moment I was born, I breathed air that had been engineered. I've never been hungry, poor, or sick. Everything I have, and everything humanity has done in the last 5 years, is because of them," she said, pointing to the dragon. "Because they gave us their technology." "That's right," Sarah said. "Why do you look so sad when you stand here?" Sarah was surprised by how direct the question was. She was quiet for a moment as she thought about what to say. "Because I remember how it used to be," she finally said. "When people had to fight, choose between competing needs, and make tough choices about limited resources. We weren't happier then, but we were different. We earned every advancement and every achievement through trial and error, through failures and breakthroughs." Maria said, "And now we just take what the dragons left us," and she understood. "It's not that easy," Sarah said with a sigh. "We're using these tools that the dragons gave us to end suffering and give people longer, better lives. How can that be wrong?" "But..." She stopped, looking for the right words. Maria said, "But it feels like we're skipping steps. Like we're getting the answers without learning how to think." "Exactly," Sarah said with a sad smile. "We've made progress in technology that would have taken us 1,000 years to do on our own. We've solved problems we didn't even know we had. But in the process we've lost something. The struggle that drives innovation, the limits that spark creativity, and the failures that teach humility." They stood together in silence and looked up at the skeleton of Skyfire. "There's more," Maria said in a low voice. "Isn't there? Things that people in the colonies don't talk about." Sarah gave her a sharp look. "What did you hear?" "Rumors. About the military buildup. About fights between colony worlds. About political groups fighting for control of dragon sites." Maria looked Sarah in the eye. "My grandma said that we're on the same path as the dragons. We're not using all this power and technology wisely." "Your grandma is a smart woman," Sarah said, pointing to a bench where they sat. "The truth? The thing that keeps me up at night? We learned the wrong thing from the dragons." "What do you mean?" "We looked at their technology, their power, and their accomplishments, and we saw something to strive for. But that's not what they wanted to show us. They wanted to show us what happens when you have power but no wisdom. They gave us a warning and we took it as an instruction manual." Sarah used her wrist device to pull up a holographic display that showed star maps of where humans had spread out. "Look at this. There are 17 colony systems and 42 habitable worlds, and there are already problems. Who controls which systems? What happens when colony worlds want to be free? Who has rights to newly discovered dragon sites? We're breaking up," Maria said. "Like the dragons did. Worse. The dragons had 50,000 years of stable civilization before the sundering. They had time to develop philosophical frameworks, ethical systems, and shared values that held them together even when they disagreed. We've had 5 years of explosive growth and barely any time to think about what it means." Sarah focused on one system in particular. New Draconia is a colony world where people who think humanity should fully embrace dragon bioengineering have settled. They are changing themselves in ways we barely understand, trying to become what the dragons were. There are already children being born there who are different, stronger, smarter, longer lived, and better than baseline humans in every way that can be measured. That should be good, right? Maria asked, not sure. Should it? What happens when some people are better than others? What happens to equality, democracy, and all the values that people have fought for thousands of years? The dragons made themselves into a hierarchy. It was built into their biology. Is that what we want? Maria was quiet as she thought about this. And it's not just New Draconia, Sarah said. On Earth, there are the purists who want to get rid of all dragon technology because they think it's ruining our basic humanity. There are also the Transcendence movement, which wants to upload human consciousness into dragon data systems and get rid of our biological forms completely. And there are companies that have a monopoly on certain dragon technologies and use that power to control whole economies. Maria said, we're making the same mistakes they did. Yes, we are. And the worst part is that we're doing it faster than they did. The dragons had thousands of years to make bad choices, but we're making them all at once. Maria asked, what do we do? Give up the technology? Go back to suffering and struggling? No, Sarah said firmly. That's not the answer either. The technology is out there. We can't put it back in the box, and trying to do so would only make things worse. The dragons didn't just give us the technology, they also gave us the knowledge of how much it cost them. We have a choice they never had. We can see how this story ends before we live it. But we're not choosing that, Maria said. We're ignoring the warning. Some are, but not all of them. Sarah stood up and pointed to the hall around them. This place exists because people like Emily Roberts and James Chin fought for it. There are museums and memorials like this on every major colony world. They are meant to keep the dragon's full story alive, not just their successes but also their failures. She opened up another display, this one showing programs that teach. Every school should have to teach dragon history. Ethics committees should look at all applications of dragon technology. There should be international treaties about how to use dragon weapons. Bioengineering programs should be overseen by democratically elected officials. None of this is perfect and all of it is messy, controversial, and slow. But it's happening because some people understand the danger. Maria asked, is it enough? I don't know, Sarah said. Maybe. Maybe not. But here's what I've learned in 5 years. The dragons couldn't save themselves, but they tried to save us. The least we can do is try to save ourselves too. Maria nodded slowly and then got up. Thanks, Commander. Sarah. I think I get what my grandmother wanted me to hear. What is your mission? Sarah asked. Where are they sending you? Beyond mapped space. Looking for more dragon sites, more technology, and more knowledge. Maria smiled wryly. More warnings that we'll probably ignore. Maybe, Sarah said. Or maybe you'll find something else. The dragons told us they left sites on hundreds of worlds. Each one might have different lessons and points of view. The dragons were a huge civilization for 50,000 years, so they couldn't have been making bad choices the whole time. Maybe there's wisdom out there that could help us avoid their fate. Maria said, that's a lot of hope to put on some old sites. We have hope, Sarah said. Hope and choice. The dragons gave us both. It's up to us what we do with them. Sarah stayed in the Hall of Remembrance after Maria left. She walked slowly through the exhibits, reading the dragons' words, studying their technology, and trying to see not what people were becoming but what they could choose to be. Emily found her there that night. Emily said, I knew I'd find you here, as she sat next to Sarah on the bench under Skyfire's skeleton. Bad day. Thoughtful day, Sarah said. How is the world of academics treating you? Emily had become one of the world's leading experts on dragon culture, traveling between worlds to give talks and advice on how to use dragon technology in a moral way. Half the people I talk to want to rush ahead without thinking. The other half want to stop all progress. Very few people want to do the hard work of finding the middle path. That sounds about right for people, Sarah said with a tired smile. Emily said, I had an interesting talk today. With a philosopher from New Beijing. She's been looking into the dragon's moral systems, the ideas that kept them stable for so long before the Sundering. She thinks she's found something important. What? The Age of Humility was the dragon's longest time of peace. It was a cultural movement that stressed the limits of power, the need for restraint, and the value of not doing everything you can do. Emily pulled up her own data which showed dragon texts. They said, power measures what you can do, wisdom measures what you choose not to do. How did that time come to an end? Sarah asked. They forgot. As time went on, the need for restraint became less clear and the temptation of unlimited power became too strong. The young dragons who were born into a world of plenty and power couldn't understand why their elders urged caution. The Age of Humility gave way to the Age of Ambition, and within 2,000 years came the sundering. Sarah said, so we're stuck in this cycle. Maybe. Or maybe we can learn to make humility a part of our institutions. We should make wisdom and restraint as important as achievement and progress in our societies, governments, and schools. Emily looked up at Skyfire. They tried to stop the sundering by talking to both sides and trying to make sense of things. They failed because by the time the fighting started, both sides were too focused on being right to think about whether being powerful made them wise. Sarah said, and we're already seeing the same patterns. Groups forming, arguments turning into positions, and positions turning into identities. Yes, Emily said. But we have one advantage over the dragons. We know how this story ends. We've seen the last page. We know that the path we're on leads to the sundering. Maybe that knowledge, that warning, can change the ending. Sarah asked, you really think that? For a moment, Emily was quiet. I have to believe it. If I don't, and if I accept that we're doomed to make the same mistakes they did even though we have every reason and chance to make better choices, then what's the point? We might as well rush toward destruction and enjoy the power while it lasts. That's not a real choice, Sarah said. Yes, Emily said. It's not. The real choice is harder. Trying to be wise when power makes you feel invincible. Exercising restraint when you have unlimited capability. Choosing to struggle with difficult questions rather than accepting easy answers. They sat together in the hall, which was getting darker as the lights slowly dimmed to evening settings. Skyfire's skeleton cast long shadows over them, reminding them of dreams that had come true and civilizations that had fallen. Sarah said, Maria asked me if what we're doing is enough. I don't know about these museums, the educational programs, or the ethics committees, I said. It's not enough, Emily said without any hesitation. Not yet. But it's a start. And maybe that's all we get. Maybe wisdom isn't a destination but a direction. Maybe the point isn't to reach perfect understanding but to keep trying, questioning, and struggling to be better than we were. The dragons gave us their scales, Sarah said in a low voice. Their technology, their power. But maybe the real gift was their story. The knowledge that even beings who became gods couldn't escape the consequences of their choices. And now that story is our story too, Emily said. The scales' legacy isn't just the technology. It's the question. Will we be remembered as the species that learned from other people's mistakes, or as the species that ignored all the warnings? The lights in the hall went out, leaving only the soft glow from Skyfire's skeleton. The dragon's bioengineered bones had been glowing for millions of years. 42 human worlds spun through space, some in orbit and others beyond. Each one was a sign of the power that humanity had taken from the dragon's legacy. Billions of people lived on those worlds, using technology they didn't fully understand and having power that their ancestors couldn't have imagined. And people were making decisions on all of those worlds. Some were smart, some were dumb, but all of them mattered. The dragons had given people everything but the ability to be sure. They had given the tools but not the instructions on how to use them properly. They had shared what they knew but not what they knew how to do. They had learned too late that wisdom couldn't be given. People had to make choices, make mistakes, and be open to learning from both in order to get it. Two people sat in the dark in the Hall of Remembrance, under the bones of a creature that had tried to save its civilization but failed. They hoped that their species would be able to learn the lessons that the dragons had learned too late. It wasn't a lot. But as Emily had said, maybe hope and new beginnings were all anyone ever got. The rest depended on the choices that came next. And people, for better or worse, were very good at making choices. It was still up in the air if they would make smart choices. The crisis started on Prometheus, one of the newest colony planets, which is at the edge of space that humans control. When the news broke, Sarah was on Earth at a conference about how to use dragon technology in a moral way. People still asked her for advice, even though she had been retired for 3 years. They wanted to hear from someone who had been there at the beginning. The alert came while we were eating lunch. Priority emergency broadcast flashed red on every device in the convention center at the same time. Hello, this is Admiral James Rodriguez from the ESS Vanguard. The message began and his voice was tight with stress. At 0847 station time, the colony on Prometheus tried to break free from Earth's rule. When their request was denied, they turned on dragon weapons and destroyed 3 diplomatic ships, killing everyone on board. 217 people are dead. This is not a drill. We are now in a state of armed conflict. The convention center was a mess. Sarah stood still, her worst fears coming true right in front of her. This was it. This was the start of the sundering of mankind. Admiral Chen Wei, who was now in charge of the Earth Defense Initiative, called her back to duty within hours. She took a Drake Drive ship to the Prometheus system and got there 3 days after the event. What she found was worse than she thought it would be. 5 years ago, a group of people who called themselves the Pioneers settled Prometheus. They believed that humanity should fully and without restriction embrace dragon technology. The colony had grown quickly because they were using aggressive terraforming and bioengineering programs that the Earth Council had asked them to slow down for safety checks many times. Admiral Rodriguez told her on the Vanguard, "They made weapons for dragons. Not just one or two. Dozens. They've been building a whole arsenal in secret for 3 years. And it's not just regular dragon tech. They've changed it in some way to make it better." Improved dragon weapons? Sarah's stomach dropped. That shouldn't be possible. The technology is already at the very end of what matter and energy can do. Apparently not, Rodriguez said as he pulled up sensor data. They've figured out how to combine several dragon energy systems into one beam. The result is a weapon that makes regular dragon tech look like a firecracker. One shot from their improved weapons went right through an asteroid that was 30 kilometers wide. Sarah looked over the numbers. Who's in charge of them? Who set this up? A man named Victor Kane. He was one of the first colonists and a bioengineer who worked on Mars before coming to Prometheus. He was smart, charming, and seemed to think that Earth was holding humanity back from its full potential. The name rang a bell. Sarah thought back and remembered that Victor Kane had been to one of her lectures 5 years ago, right after the dragon was found. He had fought with her about how important it was to be careful, saying that when survival was at stake, people couldn't afford to waste time on morals. She asked, "What does he want?" Officially, he wants to be left alone. But intelligence suggests he's planning something bigger. We've intercepted communications that suggest he's talking to other colony worlds to try to form an alliance of independent systems. A civil war, Sarah said in a low voice. Just like the dragons. Rodriguez said, "We can stop it. Prometheus is one colony world with maybe 500,000 people. We have the population, the resources, and the military edge. If we act quickly now, we can stop this before it spreads." Sarah gave him a sharp look. "How should we end it? Are you suggesting we attack a human colony?" Rodriguez shot back, "I'm suggesting we stop civilization from completely falling apart. If Prometheus breaks away, every colony world with a problem will follow. We'll split into hundreds of small states, each armed with dragon technology, all fighting for resources and power. You know what that means." Sarah agreed, the sundering. "But what you're suggesting could cause that to happen. If Earth attacks Prometheus, even in self-defense, we prove Kane's point, that Earth thinks of itself as the ruler of all humanity instead of just one part of a larger whole. What do you think we should do?" Rodriguez asked. "Should we do nothing? Let them make more weapons and get more colonies to join them?" Sarah didn't know what to say. In the weeks that followed, things got worse very quickly. 3 more colonies said they were in favor of Prometheus's independence. Not all of them could fight, but the political precedent was set. The unity that had let people settle the stars was breaking down along many fault lines. Earth called an emergency council, which brought together people from all the colony worlds. Sarah was there as an observer and advisor. The arguments were very heated and angry. Some colonies backed Earth's authority because they were afraid of the chaos that would come from splitting up. Some people felt sorry for Prometheus and said that Earth had no right to tell people living hundreds of light years away what to do. A few people tried to find a compromise by suggesting different types of federation or confederation. But the same worry was behind every argument. The person who had the most dragon technology would be in charge. And the fear of being on the wrong side of that power gap made each group take more and more extreme positions. "This is what happened to the dragons," Emily told Sarah one night. They had dinner together in the Earth Council complex, which was a rare time of peace in the middle of the crisis. Not the specific events but the pattern. Once fear comes into play and groups start to see each other as threats instead of partners, the slide toward conflict becomes almost unavoidable. Sarah insisted, "There has to be a way to stop it. We know how this story ends because we have the whole history of the dragons to learn from." Emily gently reminded her that knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing. The dragons knew their history too. Every group in the Sundering thought they were doing the right thing by defending important principles and stopping disaster. They all had good reasons for what they did. That's what made their war so terrible. It wasn't good versus evil, it was competing goods that became incompatible. Sarah moved her food around on her plate, no longer hungry. "So you're saying we're going to die?" "I'm saying we're human. We make mistakes, let fear override wisdom and choose short-term safety over long-term growth. But Emily stopped as if she were thinking. But we have something the dragons didn't: their example. We know that the path we're on has been walked before and where it leads. Maybe that's enough to change the ending. Maybe. The maybe hung in the air like a question mark. The kids were the ones who made the difference. A group of students on New Beijing, one of the more populated colony worlds, had to learn about dragon history as part of their schoolwork. They had read the warnings, looked at how things went from peace to the sundering, and saw how similar things were to what was happening now. So they did what young people have always done when adults seem bent on destroying the world. They protested. A 16-year-old named Lin Chin sent a simple video message to start it all. She was in front of a dragon artifact, one of the huge scales on display at the Museum of Remembrance in New Beijing. "My name is Lin Chin and I'm scared," she said to the camera. Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed how scared she was. "I'm scared because the leaders, politicians, and military officers who are supposed to keep us safe are about to make the same mistake that wiped out a whole civilization millions of years ago. The dragons gave us everything. Their history, their knowledge, and their technology. They showed us what happens when fear and power meet without wisdom. They showed us how a time of peace and prosperity can turn into a disaster. And we're doing it anyway. Prometheus broke away because they are scared that Earth will control them. Earth wants to stop them because they're scared of the colonies becoming independent. Both sides are making weapons because they don't trust each other. Fear is going to kill us all if we don't stop. The dragons couldn't save themselves, but maybe we can. If enough of us refuse to let fear guide us and let this crisis become our sundering, maybe we can find another way. I'm just a student on one colony world. But everyone who sees this, please don't let fear win. Our ability to be violent shouldn't stop us from being wise. The dragons told us their story so we could make ours better. Please, let's make that ending better." Within hours, the video had gone viral. Within days, students from dozens of worlds were organizing protests, making their own signs, and demanding that adults find a peaceful way to solve the problem. Young people who would inherit the world their elders built didn't want to accept that inheritance should be one of war and division. "Out of the mouths of babes," Admiral Chinwei said quietly as he watched the protests from his office. Sarah, Emily, and a few other advisors were there with him. "Of course they're right. We're being stupid. But that doesn't change the tactical reality. Prometheus has weapons and has shown a willingness to use them. How do we back down without seeming weak enough to encourage more rebellions?" "Maybe," Sarah said slowly as an idea came to her, "we don't back down. Maybe we do something else entirely." Everyone looked at her. "What if we let Prometheus be free?" she asked next. "What if Earth officially recognizes the independence of colony worlds? Not as a defeat but as progress. As the natural course of human civilization across the stars." Rodriguez said right away, "That's crazy. You're saying we should give up all power over the colonies?" Sarah said, "I think we should face the facts. We can't rule over worlds that are hundreds of light years away. We can't make people follow Earth's laws when their lives are very different from ours. The only thing we can do is use force, and that means war. But how do we stop fights between colony worlds without a central authority?" Admiral Chinwei asked. "How do we keep the sundering from happening in a system that isn't centralized?" Emily said something. "The sundering of the dragons happened because their central government fell apart. But what if we never had a central government to fall apart? What if we built a confederation of equals from the start instead of one empire falling apart?" Rodriguez said, "You're talking about the early United Nations, which didn't have any real power and couldn't stop wars." "That's right," Emily said. "But that was before people could talk to each other instantly all over the world. Now we have quantum entangled networks that connect every human world in real time. We could make something new, a system where each world is independent but connected, and where disagreements are settled through conversation based on mutual interest instead of force backed by a central authority." Rodriguez kept saying, "It would never work. Someone would cheat, someone would try to take power, and we'd be right back where we started." "Maybe," Sarah said. "But at least we would have done something different from what the dragons did. We wouldn't have made the same mistakes they did." The argument went on for hours, but eventually, with some reluctance, everyone agreed. Not because everyone thought it was the best solution, but because every other option seemed sure to cause problems. The Earth Council met in an emergency session. The vote was close, but it passed. Earth would recognize the independence of all colony worlds, giving up its claims to rule them and suggesting a new structure called the Confederation of Human Worlds. According to the proposed framework, every world would be able to run itself completely. There would be a central council just for settling disagreements and coordinating things. No world could be made to join or stay in the Confederation. If humans from different worlds fought, they would be kicked out. Sharing dragon technology would be optional but encouraged. All worlds would work together to keep the dragon historical sites as a shared heritage. The proposal was sent to all of the colony worlds, even Prometheus. For 3 days, Sarah held her breath until she got answers. If Prometheus turned down the offer and Cain pushed for war instead of peaceful separation, everything would fall apart. Cain himself gave the answer in a public broadcast. "I want to start by saying that I was wrong," he said, his face appearing on screens all over human space. "Not wrong about colony autonomy, that's a right we should have. But wrong in how I went about getting it. The attack on the diplomatic ships was a decision made out of fear and anger, and it cost lives that can never be recovered. For that, I offer no excuses, only deep regret. Earth's proposal is a big shift in their stance that addresses a lot of our worries about too much control and overreach. Prometheus agrees to this framework and will become an equal member of the Confederation. We will also," he paused, clearly gathering his strength, "submit to justice for the attack on the diplomatic ships. My senior staff and I will give ourselves up to a Confederation court, where people from many worlds, not just Earth, will decide our fate. The dragons killed each other out of fear and pride. Let's show that we can be better than that and that people can learn from other people's mistakes." The crisis wasn't over yet, not completely. There were still things to work out, tests to do, and wounds to heal. But the danger was over right away. People had pulled back from the edge of the sundering. Emily asked Sarah later, "Do you think it'll work?" They were back in the Hall of Remembrance on Kepler 186F, under the skeleton of Skyfire. This confederation, this idea that we can work together to run our own lives instead of using force? "I don't know," Sarah said. "We've never done this before on this scale, with this much power and this much distance. We're writing a new story that the dragons never tried." "Maybe that's the point," Emily said. "Maybe the real lesson from the dragons isn't to stay away from their mistakes, but to stay away from the way they thought that led to those mistakes. They tried to fix every problem by getting more power, control, and technology. We're trying something different, fixing problems by being humble, cooperating, and holding back." Sarah said, "The age of humility, remembering the dragon philosophy that Emily had found. Putting it into our structure instead of hoping it comes up naturally." "That's right." They stood quietly, looking up at the body of someone who had tried to stop a war and failed. But Skyfire's failure had taught people enough to maybe do better than the dragons had. "Lin Chin," Sarah said all of a sudden. "Has anyone talked to that student who started the protests about her future?" "Why?" Emily asked. "Because in 50 years, people like her will be in charge of the Confederation. Young people who grew up with dragon technology and dragon history and learned from both at the same time. They're the ones who might actually get the wisdom we're still trying to get. Then we should make sure we leave them a world worth leading," Emily said. Skyfire's bones glowed for 1,000,000 years above them, a reminder of power and its costs, of achievements and their consequences, and of the eternal question that faced any intelligent species, not what we can do but what we should do. People had answered that question in one way. Now they would have to deal with the consequences of that answer, and if they were lucky and smart, they would learn how to ask the question better next time. Because there would always be another time. That was how choice, awareness, and being alive worked in a universe with endless options and no sure answers. The dragons had given people their scales. Now it was up to people to show that they were worthy of the gift. 20 years after the Confederation was formed, people were no longer fully human or fully draconic. They were something completely new. Maya Rodriguez was 16 and had never been to Earth before. She was born on Prometheus, grew up in the capital city of New Hope, and studied both dragon history and human ethics. She was also one of the first kids born to parents who had chosen to have dragon bioengineering done on them. She was faster, stronger, and could see in a wider range of light than normal people. Her brain worked faster, making connections that would take other people minutes in just a few seconds. But in all the ways that mattered, she was still a person. She loved music, fought with her parents, worried about her future, and dreamed of going to places she'd only read about. She stood in the Prometheus Academy for Confederation service today, wearing the gray uniform of a second-year student. She was waiting to hear if she had been accepted into the Explorer Corps. The announcement came through her neural implant, which was one of the more subtle dragon tech improvements that let her connect her brain directly to a computer. "Go to Director Chen's office." As Maya walked through the halls of the academy, her heart raced. Legendary director Lin Chen was the student whose protest 20 years ago helped stop the First Sundering War. She had spent her life building bridges between different groups of people and was now in charge of training young people like Maya who wanted to help the human community as a whole. The view from Director Chen's office looked out over the city. He could see towers made of Dragantech materials that grew and changed to meet the needs of the people who lived there. It was a beautiful place that showed what people could do with dragon technology when they used it carefully instead of carelessly. "Please sit," Director Chen said, pointing to a chair. She was in her late 30s now. She was still young, but she looked tired from all the work she had to do. "I've looked over your application to join the Explorer Corps." Maya sat down and tried not to show how nervous she was. "Your test scores are very good," Director Chen said next. "Your physical abilities are better than what we usually see, even in enhanced candidates. Your psychological evaluations show that you have the right temperament: curious, cautious, and empathetic. By every objective measure, you should be exactly what the Corps is looking for." Maya heard the "but" before it was said. "But?" she asked. Director Chen let out a sigh. "But there's a political problem. You're one of the first full-generation enhanced humans. Your parents had bioengineering done to them, not you. There are groups in the Confederation that see people like you as—" Maya finished by saying, "as not really human." People had said it to her face, whispered it behind their hands, posted it anonymously on message boards, and said it to her face. As dragon spawn. As mistakes. As threats to the purity of baseline humans. "I'm sorry," Director Chen said, and she sounded like she meant it. "I wish I could tell you that 20 years of peace and cooperation had gotten rid of prejudice. But fear of the other is a part of being human." "So my application is turned down?" Maya asked, trying to keep the anger out of her voice. "No," Director Chen said with a lot of force. "Your application has been approved. I want you to know what you'll be up against. As a member of the Explorer Corps, you'll represent the Confederation to new worlds, colonies on the frontier, and people who have never seen an enhanced human before. Some will be afraid of you and some will hate you. You'll need to show that you are not only competent but also fundamentally human in the ways that matter." Maya asked, "How do I do that?" Chen, the director, smiled. "By being yourself. By showing that having more skills doesn't make you less human, just different. By showing that the real lesson from the dragons isn't to avoid change but to pursue it wisely and with kindness." She brought up a holographic display that showed a map of the stars. "If you agree to take on this first task, you'll be going with the ESS Discovery on a mission to a newly discovered dragon site. Preliminary scans show that it's different from anything we've found before. It's bigger, more complicated, and may contain technology or information that we haven't seen before." Maya looked at the map. The site was far away in space that hadn't been explored yet, and it took months to get there even with Drake Drive. "Why are you telling me about the political problems before I've even started?" Director Chen said, 20 years ago, adults almost ruined the future of humanity because they were too afraid to admit their fears and too proud to admit their weaknesses. I'm not going to make that mistake with your generation. You deserve to know what you're getting into." "Thanks," Maya said. "I agree to do the work." 3 months later, Maya stood on the bridge of the ESS Discovery and watched as they left Drake Drive at the edge of an unexplored system. The planet below was nothing like what was in the databases. Kepler 186f was dark and mysterious, but this world was full of bioluminescent life. From space it looked like someone had thrown gems all over the surface. They were blue, green, purple, and all glowed with their own light. Lieutenant Mark Stevens, the ship's science officer, said, "Preliminary scans are confusing." He was a normal human in his 40s and had been giving Maya strange looks since she got on board. "I'm reading dragon energy signatures, but they're working in ways we've never seen before. They're not just sitting there like they do on Kepler 186f. They're running, working, and operational." Commander Sarah Mitchell, who had come out of retirement one last time for this mission, said, "That's not possible." She was in her 70s now. Dragon medical technology kept her healthy, but she still looked her age. "The dragons went away millions of years ago." "I know that, Commander," Stevens said in a tight voice. "I'm just telling you what the sensors say." Maya stepped forward, and because her vision was better, she could see things on the surface that the others couldn't. "Over there," she said, pointing. "That structure on the southern continent. It's not just glowing, it's moving." The ship stopped making noise. "Moving how?" Commander Mitchell wanted to know. Maya said, "It looks like it's breathing." They first sent down a probe and followed all safety rules. The probe's video showed a city that looked like a dragon, but it was alive in ways that seemed impossible. Buildings that reacted to people, gardens full of engineered plants that changed their glow to make patterns, and in the middle of it all, something that made everyone gasp that it was a dragon. Not bones or a preserved skeleton but a dragon. It was huge and beautiful, lying in the middle of the plaza. Its scales glowed with the same bioluminescent patterns as the city around it. It didn't move, but sensors showed it was alive. Its metabolism was low, and its brain waves were barely detectable, but it was alive. "It's sleeping," Maya said softly. "Or sleeping," said Commander Mitchell. "Get me all of our xenobiologists right now." They looked at the dragon from space for a week, too afraid to land, wake it up, or think about what might happen if this ancient creature woke up after millions of years. They also looked into the city, and what they found changed everything they thought they knew. "It's a library," said Dr. James Chin, who is now in his 80s and still loves a good mystery. He had been looking at the city's buildings from afar. Like on Kepler 186f, but not the same. "This isn't a warning or a history, it's an invitation." "Explain," Commander Mitchell said. "The dragon, the sleeping one, is surrounded by technology that will keep it alive forever. But it's also surrounded by technology that will wake it up. More specifically," he said, pulling up complicated data, "technology that will wake it up when certain conditions are met." "What are the conditions?" "When someone smart enough to understand dragon technology comes and shows that they know how to use it responsibly. This whole city is a test. The dragons left it behind to see if any species that found them would be worthy of meeting them." "Meeting them?" Maya asked. "You mean they're not dead? They're still out there?" Dr. Chin agreed. "That's what it sounds like. This dragon is a sentinel, left behind to check out any species that gets to this level of development. If we pass the test, it wakes up and probably calls the other dragons wherever they are." The effects were huge. The dragons were still alive and hadn't killed themselves. They had left, gone to a place beyond known space, and left behind crumbs for anyone who wanted to follow. "What's the test?" Commander Mitchell asked. Dr. Chin got more information. "We have to show that we understand their history, their mistakes, and their wisdom. We have to show that we've learned from their warnings. And—" he stopped, looking uneasy. "We have to show that we've used their technology without losing who we are." Everyone looked at Maya. She said, "No pressure." The test was set up as an interface in the city's main building. It responded to Maya specifically because her enhanced biology let her connect with dragon technology in ways that regular humans couldn't. But the questions it asked weren't about what you could do or what you knew. They were about making decisions. If you could get rid of all diseases but everyone had to go through bioengineering to do it, would you? If one colony world threatened others, would you use force to stop them or take the chance that they would attack? Should you make people more than people? For 3 days, Maya took the test, answering questions that weren't easy to answer. This showed not her intelligence, but her wisdom, her humanity, and her understanding of the dragon's lessons. The dragon woke up on the 4th day. Maya had never seen anything so beautiful and scary before. The huge creature moved, and its eyes opened to show golden irises that looked like they held the light of stars. It looked at her, and Maya felt like that look went straight to her heart. When it spoke, the sound echoed not only in the air but also in her mind, in the minds of everyone on the ship, and probably in the minds of everyone in the whole system. The dragon's voice was like music and thunder. "You are human. Improved but still human. Changed but still yourselves. You learned from our mistakes without making them again. You used our gifts without letting them take over your life. You have become something new while still being something old. Are you really the last dragon?" Maya asked in a small but steady voice. The dragon said, "I am one of many guardians. Left on worlds throughout the galaxy to watch and wait. The shaped ones, what you call dragons, we did not die. We did not destroy ourselves. We left because we realized something profound. Power without purpose leads to stagnation. Achievement without challenge leads to emptiness. We had conquered every physical limitation, solved every material problem, and found ourselves without meaning." "Where did you go?" Commander Mitchell asked from the ship. The dragon said, "Beyond. To a place where new challenges await us and we can keep growing and changing. But we left behind our technology, history, and warnings, hoping that other species would use them better than we did. You humans have passed our test. You have shown that you are worthy." "Worthy of what?" Maya asked. "Deserving to know you're not alone. Deserving to hear that the universe is bigger and stranger than you think. Deserving an invitation to join us in the beyond when you're ready." The dragon moved around, getting ready to sleep again. "But not yet. You're still young and learning. Take your time. Use our gifts wisely. Learn your own lessons and make your own mistakes. We'll be here waiting when you're ready, when you've reached your own golden age and learned wisdom to match your power." Maya asked, how will we know when we're ready? The dragon's laugh sounded like starlight wind chimes. You'll know. Just like we did. Just like any smart species knows when it's time to move on. Now go. What? Grow. Become. We'll meet again, humans. I'm sure of it. The dragon's eyes closed and it went back to sleep. This left people with more questions than answers, but it also gave them something very valuable. Hope. As they got ready to go home, Maya stood on the observation deck of the ship and watched the bioluminescent world fade into the distance. Commander Mitchell came over to her. How do you feel? Maya said, I'm confused. All at once, hopeful and scared. Welcome to the human condition, Mitchell said with a smile. Some things don't change whether they're better or worse. We're always confused, always hopeful, and a little scared of what's coming next. The dragon said we passed the test, but I don't feel like we did. We're still dealing with the same problems we were 20 years ago. Enhanced versus baseline, colony versus Earth, and freedom versus order. Mitchell said, that's because passing the test didn't mean solving all our problems. It meant showing that we were trying to solve them wisely. The dragons didn't want us to be perfect. They wanted us to think about what we were doing, learn from their mistakes, and use our power wisely. Maya asked, did we? Be humble when you approach our power? For a moment, Mitchell was quiet. Trying is better than what the dragons did for most of their history. They didn't start to question their choices until it was almost too late. We questioned ours from the beginning. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what wisdom really is, not having all the answers but asking the right questions. Maya nodded slowly. What do we do now? Do we tell everyone about the dragons? That they are still alive but not here? Mitchell said, we tell the truth. Everything. The test, the dragon, the invitation. Let people decide what to do with that information. That's what the Confederation is for, making choices together instead of having them made for us. Maya thought about what the dragon had said as the Discovery drove back onto Drake Drive and started the long trip home. You are a person. Better but still human. You are still the same but you have changed. She understood that that was the real gift the dragons had given people. Not just the tools or the information, but also the belief that people could change and grow without losing who they were. That becoming more didn't mean becoming someone else. The dragons had become gods, but they were empty. Maybe people could reach something else. Not perfection or unlimited power, but a balance between who they are and who they could be. It was a small, weak, and uncertain hope. But Maya thought that all hopes start out small. The question was what people would do with this one. The news of the living dragon and its message spread through human space like fire. In just a few days, everyone on every inhabited world was asking the same questions. What did the invitation mean? Were people ready to go with the dragons to their beyond? Do they even want to? The Confederation Council asked for a meeting that had never happened before. People from every human world, every faction, and every point of view coming together to decide how humanity would respond to the dragon's test and invitation. They called it the Conference of Forever because the choices made there would affect the future of all people for many generations. The conference took place on Kepler 186f, in a huge building that was built around the Hall of Remembrance. It felt right to make these choices while standing next to the bodies of people who had walked this path before. Sarah Mitchell was there as an elder advisor, but she joked that at 75 she was less advisor, more museum piece myself. Emily Roberts was the main historian there. Yuki Tanaka came as the expert on how to use dragon technology. Victor Kane was there too. He had served his time and left politics, but his presence was a reminder of how close humanity had come to civil war. Maya Rodriguez, who was only 17 years old at the time, was also there. She had been the one to talk to the dragon and was invited to be tested and found worthy. The first session took place in an amphitheater that could hold 10,000 people. Millions more watched through quantum communication feeds. The design of the amphitheater was meant to look like dragon architecture, with natural curves, technology built in, and a look that was both functional and beautiful. Lin Chin, the Confederation Council chair and now in her late 30s, started the meeting. 20 years ago, she said, I was a scared teenager who didn't want to see people kill each other. Today I'm an adult who is scared and asking a different question. Not whether we can live but what we want to be. The dragon's message gives us a choice, but it's one we have to make on our own, knowing what it means. She pointed to the screens around the amphitheater, which showed pictures of Maya's meeting with the dragon. We've been given a gift, the knowledge that we're not alone and that the dragon survived and thrived despite the problems they faced in the past. But we all need to answer a question that comes with that gift. The argument that followed lasted 3 weeks and covered every part of being human. Religious leaders fought over what it meant for the spirit. Some people thought the dragons were angels or demons, while others thought they were proof that divinity was something that could be earned rather than given. Philosophers argued about whether joining the dragons would mean going beyond being human or betraying it. Scientists offered an analysis of the potential implications of the beyond, other dimensions, alternate realities, and states of existence that contemporary physics cannot entirely elucidate. Maya and other enhanced humans said that evolution was natural and that the whole point of living was to become more than they were. Baseline humans said that there were some lines that shouldn't be crossed and some important human traits that needed to be kept. But the most convincing arguments came from places you wouldn't expect. An old woman named Ruth Goldman took the stage on the 5th day. She was 93 years old and had never used dragon bioengineering to live longer. She was born before Kepler 186f was found. "I'm dying," she said plainly. "Not today or tomorrow, but soon. I'm dying because I chose to live a normal human life and go through the process of getting older. Some people think I'm stupid for throwing away more decades or centuries of life." She stopped and looked around the amphitheater. "But I've been around long enough to see people change from what we were into what we are now. I've seen us almost kill ourselves with fear and power. I've seen us pull back from that edge. And now I see that we may be facing our last choice as a species." The dragon wanted to know if we were ready to join them. "I don't think we are. Not because we aren't strong enough or advanced enough. Yes, we are. We have learned from their mistakes, mastered their technology, and built a civilization that stretches across the stars. We can do everything the dragons did and even more." She smiled gently. "But being ready isn't the same as being able. It's about finishing." The dragons left because they had finished their story in this world. They had looked into every possibility, answered every question, and reached every goal they could think of within the limits of known space and physics. So they went out to find new stories and problems to solve. We're not done with our story yet. We haven't even started yet. We have thousands of years of growth ahead of us, as well as problems to solve, challenges to face, and wonders to discover in this universe. We might be ready to leave like the dragons did one day. But not yet. Not while we're still figuring out what it means to be human. People in the amphitheater clapped loudly. On the 10th day, a group from New Draconia came and said something else. Some of them were so far along in bioengineering that they didn't even look like regular people anymore. Sarah Nightscale, their spokesperson, had changed herself with dragon DNA and spoke passionately about transcendence. She said, "Ruth Goldman talks about finishing our human story in a beautiful way. But who says there's just one story? Who says that everyone has to go the same way?" The Confederation was based on the idea of choice, which meant that each world and each person could choose their own future. We in New Draconia have decided to fully accept the dragon legacy. We want to go beyond what we are now and become more than human. We're ready to go with the dragons if they want us to. We've been ready. She pointed to the other delegates. Their improved bodies had scales that glowed with bioluminescence, eyes that could see colors that normal people couldn't, and bodies that could survive in a vacuum without suits. "We're not saying that everyone should do what we do. But don't take away our choice just because other people aren't ready." The answer was more mixed. Some people cheered while others booed. The split in human civilization was clear for all to see. The argument was about to break down into chaos when Maya Rodriguez asked to speak. Her voice had power because she was the young woman who had passed the dragon's test and was now an improved human who still had her essential humanity. She said, "I've been listening to everyone for 10 days. Her voice was so strong that it could be heard clearly in the amphitheater without any extra sound. "And I think we're asking the wrong thing. We want to know if we're ready to join the dragons. But maybe we should be asking what it really means to join them." She got information from her meeting with the Sentinel Dragon. The dragon didn't tell us to leave this world. It didn't say we had to stop being people. It sent an invitation, but we thought that accepting it meant giving up everything we are. What if it isn't? What if the place that the dragons go to is somewhere we can get to while still being in touch with this world? What if joining them doesn't mean leaving humanity behind but making it bigger? Emily Roberts got up from her chair. "Maya makes a great point. We have been using our ideas about what transcendence means to figure out what the dragon said. But they did something we haven't been able to do. They can be in more than one state at the same time. That could be what they are offering. Not that we leave but that we grow." After that, the conversation changed from leaving or staying to growth or stagnation. Can people grow and change while still being who they are? Is it possible for people to choose how much they want to improve without causing long-lasting divisions in society? Can the species progress collectively while honoring diverse trajectories? By the third week, everyone was starting to agree, but not in the way that anyone had thought they would. The assembly saw the final proposal from Director Chin. After 3 weeks of debate, sharing thousands of points of view, and spending countless hours thinking about it, the Confederation Council suggests the following plan. First, we know that the whole of humanity is not ready to accept the dragon's invitation. In this reality, we have hundreds of years of growth ahead of us before we finish our story. Second, we know that people are ready at different times. Some people want to transcend right away while others never want to. Both options are good. Third, we suggest starting the Threshold Initiative, a program that looks into the line between our world and the dragon's world. People who want to reach transcendence can do so as part of a long-term research project. This could help future generations while still staying connected to baseline humanity. Fourth, we promise to protect dragon sites as sacred heritage, places where everyone can come to learn from the past and think about the future. The Hall of Remembrance on Kepler 186F will be turned into a permanent university where students from all over the human world can study together. Fifth, we send a message to the Sentinel Dragon thanking them for the invitation but saying that we need more time. We are not saying no. Please be patient while we finish growing ourselves. People voted on the proposal. People from each world made their choice. The result wasn't unanimous, but it was clear. 73% were in favor. People had decided to turn down the invitation right away but leave the door open for the future. They would grow in their own time and in their own way, becoming whatever they were meant to be without rushing to meet someone else's idea of transcendence. Sarah Mitchell found Maya Rodriguez alone in the Hall of Remembrance after the conference was over. She was looking up at Skyfire's skeleton. Sarah said, "You changed the debate," as she sat next to her. Changed how people thought about what the choice really meant. Maya said, "I just asked a question. Isn't that what you said wisdom was? Are you asking the right questions?" Sarah smiled. "Did I really say that? So, how do you feel about the choice? You're better than most people because you're closer to the dragons. Do you think we made the right choice?" For a long time, Maya didn't say anything. "I believe we made a choice that was human. Not perfect, not sure, and probably not even the most logical choice. But it belonged to us. We made it together, even though we didn't always agree and had different points of view and a messy democratic process." Sarah said, "The dragons never had that. By the time they started arguing, they were already too far apart to agree. Their democratic systems failed and war broke out." Maya said, "They waited too long. They didn't deal with their differences until those differences turned into chasms. We're dealing with ours while we can still talk to each other and find things we agree on." Sarah said, "You sound hopeful." Maya said, "I am. Not because I think everything will be easy or that we won't mess up, but I think we're getting better. Learning for real, not just gathering information but getting smarter." She pointed to the hallway around them. "The dragons gave us their history and their technology. We used both of them. We took their warnings and their power and we're trying to do better than they did. That might be enough. Maybe that's all any species can do. Try to be better than the ones that came before us, learn from their mistakes, and hope that the next generation does the same for us." Sarah nodded slowly. "When I stood in this hall 20 years ago, right after we almost tore ourselves apart, I wondered if we could learn wisdom fast enough to survive our own power. I still don't know what the answer is. But I know we're doing our best. That's more than I thought I could hope for back then." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people from different generations. One was near the end of her natural life, and the other was just starting a life that might last for hundreds of years. They both looked up at the remains of a being that had tried and failed to save its civilization. But the dragon's failure gave people a chance. And people were taking that chance very seriously. They were fighting about it, dealing with it, and bringing all the messy, complicated, beautiful things about being human to it. The dragon's offer was still open. Maybe in 100 years or 1,000 years, people will be ready to accept it. But for now, they had to follow their own path, write their own story, and gain their own wisdom. And Sarah thought that was the right thing to do. 50 years went by. Sarah Mitchell died when she was 125 years old. She had lived long enough to see 3 generations of people grow up with dragon technology as a normal part of their lives. Representatives from every human world came to her funeral, which showed how important she was in helping humanity through its most dangerous change. As the world's best dragon historian, Emily Roberts kept working. She taught new students how to study not only the technology but also the philosophy, ethics, and deeper lessons that the dragons had left behind. The Scales of Wisdom, a full history that she wrote, became required reading in schools all over human space. Maya Rodriguez was the first enhanced human to be the Confederation Council chair. She held this job for 20 years. Under her leadership, the Threshold Initiative was able to set up ways to talk to the Sentinel Dragon and start early research into what the dragons had called the Beyond. But this is no longer their story. This is the story of people 50 years after the Conference of Forever, when they kept growing, fighting, and changing. 23 students, between the ages of 16 and 60, were in the classroom at Luna University. Some were baseline humans, some were improved in different ways, some were from Earth, and others were from far-off colony worlds. But they were all there to learn from Professor David Chin, Lin Chen's grandson and one of the world's top experts on how to mix dragons and humans. Today, he said, showing a holographic picture of a dragon skeleton, we're going to talk about what historians call the long tomorrow. This is the time we're living in now, 50 years after humanity chose to keep developing instead of immediately accepting transcendence. He changed the picture to show the Threshold Station, a huge research center built at the edge of the solar system where the line between normal space and the dragons beyond was thinnest. The Threshold Initiative has made amazing progress. We now know that the beyond is not a place but a state of being that can only be reached by changing your mind. The dragons did this through millions of years of evolution and bioengineering. Some humans are trying to do the same thing. A student put her hand up. Kira Knox, a human from New Draconia with special abilities. Professor, is it true that the Threshold researchers are close to making the shift? Will we be able to see humans join the dragons in our lifetime? David said, it could happen. The study suggests that only a few people, those who have had the most bioengineering done to them and have trained their minds using techniques based on dragon neural patterns, might be able to make the switch in 10 to 20 years. Michael Santos, a baseline human from Earth, spoke up. But should they? We decided 50 years ago that people weren't ready. Has that changed? That's the question, isn't it? David said with a smile. Has humanity changed enough in the last 50 years to be ready for something that took the dragons millions of years to get ready for? He showed numbers on the hologram. Let's look at the data. In the last 50 years, there have been no wars between human worlds. 3 small conflicts were resolved with the help of the Confederation. Overall, poverty has gone down by 93%. The average lifespan of a human is now 220 years for those who use dragon medical technology. We have successfully terraformed 215 planets. We have also made contact with the first intelligent species that is not human, and we are using what we learned from the dragons to help them improve. By every objective measure, humanity is doing well. We're more peaceful, prosperous, and advanced than we've ever been. So have we earned the right to move forward? The class was quiet as they thought about the question. Finally, Rachel Goldman, an older student, spoke. She was 97 years old and the great-granddaughter of Ruth Goldman, who spoke at the Conference of Forever. My great-grandmother said we hadn't finished our story yet. I think she was right then and I think she's still right now. 50 years is nothing compared to the millions of years the dragons existed. We're still babies compared to them. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do it yet. But, Kira said, isn't the whole point of being alive to grow, change, and become more than we are? If we always wait until we're completely ready, we'll never move forward. Michael said, there's a difference between natural growth and rushing into something we don't fully understand. The dragons left because they had seen everything this universe had to offer them. We haven't. Why leave before we've finished learning what we can learn here? David let the argument go on for a while before getting involved. These are the kinds of questions that every generation will have to answer for themselves. There is no one right answer that will work for all time. What matters is that we keep asking, debating, and thinking about these choices instead of just reacting. He changed the hologram again, this time showing the Sentinel Dragon on its bioluminescent world. It was a famous image in human culture, the dragon sleeping peacefully while waiting for people to be ready. The dragon is still there, still waiting, and still patient. They're not pushing us, judging us, or making us feel bad for taking our time. They're just there to remind us of what's possible and what is still to come. Some of you in this room might be the ones who eventually join them. Others might choose to stay in this reality for the rest of your lives, however long those lives may be. Both choices are valid and will shape the future of humanity. The dragons wanted us to learn that we should keep learning, growing, and using wisdom when we have power. They didn't want us to be like them, they wanted us to be the best version of ourselves. On the other hand, Commander Jennifer Wu was floating in a meditation chamber at the Threshold Station. This chamber was made to help people reach higher levels of consciousness. She had been getting ready for 5 years, going through a lot of bioengineering and training her mind by combining human meditation with dragon neural patterns. She was getting closer. She could sense it. The line between here and there was getting thinner and easier to cross. When she was really meditating, she could sometimes feel something beyond. Something huge, complicated, beautiful, and completely strange but somehow familiar. The dragons were there. She was aware of it. And they were waiting like stars for people to come and join them. But Jennifer also knew something that was hotly debated in schools and councils. Readiness wasn't something everyone had. It was one person. Some people were ready now. It was fine if some people were never ready. The dragon's invitation wasn't to all of humanity. It was for anyone who wanted it and was ready for it, someone who had learned how to use that much power and freedom wisely. Jennifer was almost done. She would take that step soon, maybe in a year or 5. She would leave this world and join the dragons in the afterlife, becoming something more than human but still keeping her humanity. And when she did, she would be a bridge between people and dragons, telling them what she found, helping those who wanted to follow, and telling those who wanted to stay that both choices were valid. She thought that was what the dragons had really been waiting for. Not for people to become like them, but for people to change into something that could live in both worlds, keeping connections while pushing the limits. It was a tougher road than just leaving and going beyond. But it was a more caring and human one. That made the extra work worth it. Victor Kane was dying in New Hope, the capital of Prometheus. He was 102 years old, and even though he could have lived for hundreds of years longer with dragon medical technology, he chose to let nature take its course. Some people said it was punishment for almost starting a civil war 50 years ago. Some people thought it was wise to let some people die so that new ideas could come in. He thought it was just his choice and that he had earned the right to make it. Maya Rodriguez came to see him on his last day. She was 67 now, but she looked like she was only 40. Her improved biology kept her young and full of life. She had been the council chair, retired, raised children, and now she taught Prometheus at the university. "Hello, old enemy," Victor said with a weak smile from his hospital bed. "Hello, old friend," Maya said as she sat down next to him. Victor thought, "We never really figured out which one we were." Maya said, "Both. We were on opposite sides of an argument that almost killed us. But we were both trying to do the same thing. Keep people safe, help them live, and give them a future." Victor said softly, "I was wrong. About hurrying to become independent, making weapons, and believing that power was more important than unity." "You were also correct," Maya said. "About colony worlds deserving freedom, about Earth not being able to tell other worlds what to do, and about people needing to make their own choices. Maybe that's the secret," Victor said, his breath coming hard. "Maybe no one is completely right or wrong. Maybe wisdom is just knowing how to find the middle ground between two competing truths." Maya said, "The dragons knew that. Eventually. After their sundering, they gave us all their knowledge so we could find that balance faster than they did." "Did we?" Victor asked. "Find it?" Maya thought about the last 50 years. The fights were over, the deals were made, and the long hard work of building a civilization that spanned the stars while keeping its basic humanity. "We're finding it," she said. "We're finding it every day in every choice. It's not a destination, it's a process." Victor smiled. "I'm happy I lived long enough to see how it turned out, or at least how it has turned out so far." Maya held his hand while he closed his eyes and his breathing slowed and then stopped. Another person dies and another point of view leaves the world. But his ideas, arguments, and contributions to the big debate about the future of humanity stayed. They had become part of the collective knowledge that people were slowly, painfully, and beautifully building up. There was a ceremony going on Earth, in the rebuilt United Nations complex, which is now mostly a museum and memorial site. The Melodians, a race that communicated through complex sound patterns, were the first non-human species that humans had ever met. They were welcomed into the Confederation as full members. When humans found the Melodians, they were about as advanced as people were in the Bronze Age. After learning from the dragons' mistakes when they tried to help other species, humans spent 30 years carefully helping the Melodians grow at their own pace. They did this by sharing knowledge while respecting their culture and giving them technology while making sure they understood what it meant. The Melodians had now built their own spaceships, shown that they were smart about how they used the gifts humanity had given them, and were ready to join the interstellar community as full partners. Lin Chin, who is 73 years old and the Confederation's ambassador for First Contact, spoke to both species. 50 years ago, humans almost destroyed themselves with power they didn't know how to use wisely. We were saved by the warnings left by another species, the dragons, who had made the same mistakes before us. Today, we welcome our first partners in making sure that those mistakes are never made again. She pointed to the Melodian representatives, whose bodies were covered in resonating chambers that made their language. The Melodians give us new ideas, new ways of thinking, and new wisdom to add to the knowledge we are all building. Together, we will keep growing, learning, and approaching the universe with humility and hope. The ceremony was shown on TV all over human space and on the Melodian homeworld. Billions of people saw two species, so different but united in their desire to be better than their worst impulses, promised to work together for a better future. It wasn't perfect. There would be fights, misunderstandings, and growing pains. But it was a start, a base for something bigger than either species could build on its own. There was a new display in the Hall of Remembrance on Kepler 186f. It told the whole story of how people have used dragon technology for the last 50 years, including the successes and failures, the close calls and last-minute saves, and the slow change from a species that didn't know how to use its new power to one that does. The last thing in the exhibit was a message from a group of historians, philosophers, scientists, and regular people from all over human space. It said, "To the dragons wherever you are. Thanks for your gift, your warning, and your patience. 50 years ago, we chose to keep growing instead of joining you in transcendence right away. Since then, we've learned a lot. We've made mistakes, but we've learned from them. We've faced problems, but we've worked through them together. We've been given power, and we're slowly learning how to use it wisely. We aren't ready yet, and we might not be for hundreds of years. But we're getting there, one choice at a time, one generation at a time. Your sentinel is waiting on its glowing world. One day we'll be ready to fully wake it up, accept your invitation, and join you in the beyond. But for now, we're happy to grow in our own way at our own pace, becoming something that honors both our human origins and the dragon legacy you've shared. We hope you like what we're becoming. We hope you see in us not a reflection of your mistakes, but a new path, a different story, proof that your sacrifice and patience weren't for nothing. When we finally get to you, we'll be something new. A mix of what we were and what you gave us, shaped by our own choices and wisdom, not as people trying to become dragons. We keep going until then. We keep growing. We keep learning. And we still hope that wherever you are and whatever you've become, you've found the peace and purpose that you couldn't find in this world. Thank you for showing us the way. We promise to make the most of the path you have shown us. With thanks and hope. Humanity. That's what the dragon's gift really was. Not just technology or knowledge, but time. It's time to take your time and grow. It's time to make mistakes and learn from them. It's time to get wise enough to match your power. It was time for them to become something that would honor the legacy they had been given. People had gone to the stars because of the dragon scales, but what they did there would depend on their own choices. So far, those choices had been good ones. Not perfect, messy, and sometimes hard, but good. The long tomorrow lay ahead, full of chances and problems, wins and losses, and questions that would never have easy answers. But all of humanity would face it together. Baseline and enhanced, young and old, born on Earth and in colonies, human and Melodian, and any other species they might meet. They would face it with the knowledge they had gained, the technology they had mastered, and the humility they had learned from the dragons. And one day, when they were really ready, they would accept the invitation and go to the other side with the dragons. But not yet. Not while there was still so much to do, learn, and become in this world. The scales had made them fly. Now people had to learn how to fly. And they would. In their own time, in their own way, and with their own wings. That was the promise people made to the dragons, to each other, and to all the generations that would come after them. It was a promise that needed to be kept.